Welcome to the Black Doctors Talk podcast. I am Dr. Christopher Holmes, host for this episode and member of the Black Doctoral Network. Today, I am joined by Dr. Nena Hisle, who is a veteran educator, middle school counselor, and CEO. Welcome, Dr. Hisle.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Dr. Holmes.
I am looking forward to this as a fellow educator. I know you have some great gems and nuggets that you want to drop. So let's get started. I would like for you to start by telling our viewers and listeners a little bit about your background. Where does it all begin for you?
Well, it begins with the fact that I have been working for Pittsburgh Public Schools as both a school counselor and a middle school teacher for the past 25 years. I'll be starting my 25th year. And ironically, I have known since probably about the age of 13 that I wanted to be a school teacher. I come from a family of teachers. I have an uncle who lives in Philadelphia and his wife. They were teachers, and I used to spend the summers there. He was a history teacher, and I enjoyed checking papers. And it was just something that I always wanted to do. And started out, I took a scenic route to get there. I started at 27 years of age. I taught second and third grade and fourth grade, then taught at the middle school level for about 5 years as a world cultures teacher, then spent about 2 years in high school, and I spent the bulk of my career as a middle school guidance counselor in an area of Pittsburgh called Brookline.
So you cover the gamut from elementary to high school and then settled back in middle school where most people are like, no, don't take me to middle school. So what
Absolutely.
is it about middle school that you like so much?
People ask me that often because most people are trying to get out of middle school. I have a very middle school personality, I guess. You definitely have to have a sense of humor, which I pride myself in having. You have to be patient. You have to, I just like that age level. They still have a sense of humor. They still need to be babied a little bit, but they
Mhm.
also are independent enough that they can think for themselves, work independently, but they still need some nurturing and some guidance. And they know if you like them, and they know if you like that age level. So it's just something that I'm just used to, and I really enjoy it.
I've never thought about this until you said that. But in essence, we all have a little middle schooler inside of us because we
Absolutely.
need a little guidance, but we also want to be a little independent as well.
Right.
You
Right.
just gave me something just that quickly. See, I received that. I am a middle schooler in the inside. Oh,
Right. Right.
wow. So you were in the classroom and then you
Yes.
transitioned to being a counselor.
Hmm.
So talk a little bit about the rewards of being a classroom teacher.
That was fun. Although I spent only 5 years in the classroom, the thing I liked about it was it gave me more of an opportunity to forge closer relationships, I would say, with the kids and their families, because I saw them 5 days a week. I got an opportunity to just do fun things with them, fun activities, and build closer bonds and relationships with them. So, although I enjoyed it, I also saw that I was actually counseling them and teaching them because, based on the rapport that I had developed with them, they also sought me out in a counseling, mentoring type role. So, I thought at about the fifth year, I probably should transition into something a little more different so I could impact them in more of a one-on-one, way. So that's one of the reasons why I transitioned into a school counselor.
So when you think about your high school experience and your middle school experience,
Hmm.
what would you say in terms of the students is the biggest difference beyond the curriculum?
On the curriculum. High school students probably, I mean, they do have a sense of humor, but definitely they don't have the sense of humor that middle schoolers have. Middle schoolers tend to be able to just laugh things off, I think, a little bit easier than high schoolers do. High schoolers have the social pressure, but they also have the academic pressure because they know they only have 4 short years before they're, you know, starting out their life goals and starting their lives out. The other thing about middle schoolers, you really you have to be able to deal with the emotional highs and lows. And with high schoolers, they have those, but they're not as pronounced, I would say, as with middle schoolers. You'll have a middle school child who'll cuss you out first period and then see you in the hallway third period and want a hug.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to adapt to that, not take it personal. Remind them, you did just cuss me out first period. I didn't forget. And after we go through that and they apologize, which they typically do,
Yeah.
I'll give you a hug, but that's not acceptable.
No.
So, I always try to make everything a teaching moment for them to let them know, hey, I'm human too. So, working with both ages are rewarding, but I think the middle schoolers need the skill set that I have, which is more of a mothering, more of a um, nurturing skills. I think they definitely respond to that better.
So let's dive a little bit deeper, because I cannot have a conversation with a counselor and not bring up COVID-19 and potentially how it has impacted our students as we prepare, or some of us are already back in school, but prepare to move back into a normal school situation. From your experience, I know your counseling probably looked a little bit different during the pandemic. And so kind of talk to us about what that looked like and how did you provide services to kids from a virtual standpoint?
It did. It looked like being available almost 24/7.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
we did use Microsoft Teams to communicate with the students, so I was able to meet with them one-on-one virtually. But I did provide parents and students with my personal cell phone number, so I would receive frequent texts on the weekends and the evenings, and quite often some invites into chats on Microsoft Teams. But I actually enjoyed it because I like being accessible to my students and I didn't mind responding to them. And unfortunately, we had a sixth grader commit suicide.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes, yeah, at the beginning of the school year. And what made it worse is I had not had an opportunity to even forge a relationship with this beautiful young lady because we're a middle school, grade 6 through 8. So she had never been in our building before. She was just coming for the first time. So
Wow.
that definitely put me on high alert. So anytime a child needed me, I was like on the spot. So I went to homes. I did a lot of home visits. We went out in the community, delivered gifts. We did a lot of community outreach. So we definitely made it work. Phone calls, just being, 100%. Like I was just on everything, paying attention to social media, communicating with the kids, trying to have definitely a pulse on what was going on since you weren't able to do it. And then I did classroom lessons also via Teams. So I had a chance to, try to bond with the kids that way also.
Wow. So you brought up doing classroom lessons. And so when I think about my counselors in school, um, most of my interactions with them involve me going to their offices, and we talked about grades, classes, getting ready for graduation, college applications, SAT, ACT. My counselors did not come to my classroom to offer lessons. So I say that to ask this question. How have you seen changes in the field of school counseling since you've been in it?
Yeah, I vowed to make sure that I was an accessible and a hands-on counselor with an open door policy. Unfortunately, I'm not in the building yet. We start within actually next week. But my office is just bright and colorful, like the wall behind me. And I have beanbag chairs, and I'm known for snacks. And they always come to me for lotion, hair supplies, deodorant, anything. I'm the go-to person. But counseling has changed in a way that you have to have a non-judgmental open door policy. My counselor in high school, I think I met with him one time. I did attend a school in the late 80s, late, a predominantly white school. I believe I was one of maybe 3 or 4 Black students. And he made next to no contact to me, did not encourage me. to do anything. So I wanted to make sure that I had an impact on all of my students in my building, because I do work in a racially mixed building,
Mm.
which I enjoy that because I think I can be impactful to all students, white, black, any race. So I wanted to make sure that the kids knew my name, they knew who I was, they could trust me, and they started to reveal some very personal and very interesting things, and they felt safe that they could do that with me. So that was key.
Wow. So you just said one of my favorite words when I talk about education, and that is the word safe.
Yes.
And I think safety is crucial for
Hmm.
students to academically be successful. Um,
Absolutely.
and so I have my own understanding of what safety is and what it looks like.
Mhm.
But can you share from your perspective, what does it mean for a child to be safe at school?
Right. So initially, when I think of safety, the most obvious safe is physical safety, safe from bullying, safe from harm. And I'm blessed to be in a building where I have two administrators that support a safe environment. We take bullying seriously. We don't ignore reports from students. We take the time to investigate each situation. We interview students. We take their concerns. We're proactive before it snowballs into a more serious situation. So I think that's the main thing. And we do it as discreetly as possible so that if a student comes to reveal that they're being harassed or bothered by another student, we don't just blow it off as just middle school, suck it up, you
Mm,
know, things. We take it serious because we recognize that if we don't squash it when it's in its infancy, that it definitely can snowball into something major.
yes.
And as a mother of three lovely children, I would not want anyone to take my child's concerns that they brought to an adult, um, take them lightly. So that's the main way. And the kids tell it in our school, it's generational. We have siblings that attend. So I tend to have a good rapport with the kids, and they tell their sister and their brother as they come to me year after year, you can talk to Dr. Hisle, she'll listen, she'll help you. And I want the kids to feel that way.
Yes.
And I feel like that I am an advocate for them when it comes to that. And then I feel that I'm a liaison and an advocate between them and the teachers and sometimes the administrators. So they see me as a support. So if they're having an issue with an adult, if it's a teacher, if it's their parent, or even if it's an administrator, they know that they can come to me to try to support them and navigate that. Now I tell them if you're doing wrong, I can't always support you, but I can help you communicate with that adult so that you're not getting in more trouble.
Right.
And then finally, when it comes to safety, if we have a lot of kids that are exploring gender issues, some little gender confusion, or some aren't confused at all. They know exactly that they don't identify with the gender that they were born, and they're struggling with mainly family acceptance. Fortunately, we have a staff and we have students that are very accepting. But I definitely, when they come and reveal things to me, I'm like, okay, it's just like non-judgmental, and they just feel safe, and that's important to me.
Wow.
Mhm.
That sense of safety as it relates to individuality
Right.
is so important. And I think this is something, um, I think we saw it happening 10 years ago, but people didn't really want to address it. And
Right.
now it's in our buildings and it's happening, as you said, at the middle school level. We often saw it at high school. People and kids were like, you know what? This is who I am. I am
Yes.
proud of it. Accept it. I'm in your face. And now you find middle schoolers saying, this body is not me. And
Mm-hmm.
we oftentimes find adults, sometimes in school, sometimes at home, that don't quite understand what they're trying to communicate to
Absolutely.
them and understand that doesn't make sense to me. So,
Right.
as a counselor, here you are in between. You're like the meat between the bread, right?
Yeah.
Trying to bring it all together.
Right. Right.
How challenging is that for you sometimes to be caught in the middle between the students and the adults and trying to bring some type of reconciliation or understanding?
It can be very challenging. It's most challenging with the staff at times because I often see my eyes have been opened after I have made this journey into social justice knowledge. So while we're doing the research for my PhD, which we haven't gotten into, but I've done social justice research on racial microaggressions. And sometimes once your eyes are open to things and you start to learn about things, you almost wish you didn't know it because you can't turn it off. And I've started to learn about racial trauma in children and some of the things that happen in schools that encourage and support racial trauma. So when I see things going on in the hallways where teachers are talking to children and mistreating children verbally, not always physically or anything like that, and I see it happening, and I can't ignore it because my job is to advocate for them. But then it becomes tense between the adult and I because there's this network of teachers, and I don't want to call it the good old boy network, but it's kind of almost like with law enforcement, you don't tell on your own. And when they don't see me supporting them and they see me advocating for the child. So let me give you an example. There we have some male teachers that sometimes like to yell and get in the faces of some of the Black males in our school. And I can see it escalating, and I try to lead the male away, but the teacher is following after the student, and the child has to save face, but it's the child that's going to get in trouble. And I'm trying to get the child away, and the teacher becomes angry because he thinks I'm siding with him, and just trying to explain that that's not how you discipline really any child, but certainly not a child of color. It just really puts me in an uncomfortable position, and it's impacted some of my relationships with some of the teachers negatively. So that's difficult. That has been probably my biggest struggle with the staff, trying to explain to them that I'm here to advocate for the children. Like I'm not really not your friend. I don't want to be your enemy, but I'm not an administrator. I'm not a teacher. I'm here for the kids.
So let's go back to your dissertation.
Okay.
So you spoke on it briefly, but it was really focused on racial microaggressions of Black and white teachers working in urban school districts.
Yes,
Why was that important for you to do the work, and why is that important to the field of academia and education?
absolutely. So I attended a workshop that the school district put on and learned about this topic that I had never heard about, racial microaggressions. And it was kind of an aha moment. It finally gave a name to some experiences that I had had over the years. And I just kept saying to myself, I've been through that. Somebody has said that to me. And I didn't have a name for it. And it finally validated some of the discomfort, some of the slights. And for those that don't know what racial microaggressions are, basically, it's subtle slights and insults that typically white people do towards someone of a marginalized group, so a person of color. But there's also microaggressions, which is a slight or an insult towards someone based on either their social status, it can be your weight, your mental health, also your class, all sorts of things. But once I found out, I attended that workshop, it just kind of, you know, set a light off in my head, and I found it very interesting. Started to do research, realized there was a ton of research about racial microaggressions being perpetrated towards Black students by white teachers. And that would be the case because the majority of teachers tend to be white females. There's plenty of research, that supports that statement. And then I saw that there was research about racial microaggressions in workplaces, in higher education, towards Black college students, towards Black professors, and everywhere else, but not next to no research on whether or not Black teachers were being subjected to racial microaggressions in schools. In addition, the research that I had studied also didn't give any input from white teachers. And I tend to have close relationships with white people also. And I wanted to know what they knew and what they had experienced, because I thought it would open up an area of information that probably had been closed before. And I thought giving them an opportunity to speak anonymously, perhaps I would be able to get more information. So that's basically a paucity of research was available about Black teachers' experiences. And I just wanted to see what they were experiencing in the schools.
Wow, I am totally interested in this work because, like you
Yeah,
said, I have had these experiences, and when I heard the word finally, it made a connection with things I had
hmm,
gone through and had given
absolutely.
it a label.
Right,
And even now, as an adult, I still experience racial microaggressions, but now I know it and I see it and I call people out on it.
absolutely.
Um, so you get this degree, and congrats on that. And you also start a company called Eye on Equity Consulting. Why did you see there a need for this?
Well, based on doing the research and knowing that one of the problems with racial microaggressions are they tend to be so subtle. And the whole premise behind it is, although there are three different types of racial microaggressions, there's micro insults, which are probably the most benign. People really aren't intentionally trying to be, offensive. Then there's a micro invalidation, where basically they're just not recognizing you as a person of color. They're invalidating your racial experiences. But micro assaults are the worst. So that is basically someone calling you the N word. They're blatantly being racist. So after doing that research, I spent months and months obsessively doing PowerPoints, obsessively reading articles and books. And my family kept laughing and they're like, "You're done with school. Why do you keep focusing on this?" And I kept saying, "I gotta be ready. I gotta be ready." Somebody's gonna ask me to present for them. Somebody, I need to be ready. So probably in about December, I started to try to think of a logo name and a company name. And I kept seeing like the Eye of Horus, which is an Egyptian symbol, and the Eye of Ra, which is the feminine version of the Eye of Horus, which is an Egyptian symbol. And I kept thinking about eye, and my eyes have been opened now, and they've been open to the inequities and the things that are going on in society, and the whole George Floyd and Breonna Taylor um, deaths. And I just realized that once people's eyes are open to things, open to the inequities, that perhaps things would change, which is the whole premise of the consulting business, is that I want to educate people. And that's the feedback that I've gotten from most of my presentations, and why people like them is I don't come at the audience in a way that makes them feel attacked, that makes them feel guilty. Many of the participants, which are typically white, come to me and say, "Finally, I don't feel like I am guilty and like I have caused these horrible things to happen to people of color." And I try to give people strategies and tips if they're the victim, if they're the bystander. So I chose Eye on Equity, and the eye is blue because typically the people that are making the decisions, the people that are sitting at the table and who are the stakeholders, are not people of color, and sometimes they have blue eyes. So that's why I decided that Eye on Equity, you need to have different people, a different lens. You need to look at things from a different lens, a different eye. So with this consulting firm, I have been doing diversity trainings on unconscious bias, racial microaggressions, just developing comfort and talking about race, cultural competence for educators, and also racial trauma, which I have written 2 chapters on racial trauma in children who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And I've done that for a colleague of mine, Dr. Carrie Ann Bernadowski. She was a part of my committee at Robert Morris University where I completed my PhD.
Wow.
So far, it's been, I kind of called this my gap year,
Mhm.
which is almost over, where I've been doing some of my presentations for free, but I have charged for a few, and I have something in the works now with Robert Morris University, which is here in the Pittsburgh and vicinity. So so far, it's I'm taking it slow, and I'm learning from some master class people, and so I'm really excited about it because it's definitely necessary. Companies are like dying to have people come in and train their staff, but I want it to be meaningful and sustainable training, not just a one and done type
Right.
thing, and that's it.
Right. Well, you have hit on several things that we're gonna tackle some of those words, vocab words that you just used,
Okay.
because I don't want people to get lost. As you know, as of recently, the big trigger word in education has been critical race theory, right? I
Yes.
mean, people are all up in arms over critical race theory, and my idea, or my phrase now is, it doesn't have to be a theory for race to be critical. Race
Right.
has always
Right.
been critical. We don't need a theory
Absolutely.
attached to it. So
Absolutely.
I'm going to give you four words, and some of these words you've already said, and I want you to tell me how each word impacts Black students, students of color, in your experience or from your knowledge. Okay.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
First word, racial microaggressions.
So, racial microaggressions definitely impact students of color. Unfortunately, our school systems are, and I say unfortunately, but the majority of our teachers are white women. And I say unfortunately because we obviously have a dire need for more teachers of color. However, I don't see that happening anytime soon to make it more balanced. So it's important that all teachers are trained on how detrimental racial microaggressions can be towards students of color. So I think definitely some training for teachers on the impact of racial microaggressions, because it's not just that you've hurt someone's feelings. There's extensive research that shows racial microaggressions can impact you mentally, physically, and cause some very serious medical issues such as diabetes, depression, anxiety, even suicide.
Uh,
So they're very serious.
all right. Second word,
Mhm.
unconscious bias.
Unconscious bias. That's an interesting one. I do trainings on those. Unconscious bias, we all have biases. And I think definitely making people aware of what their unconscious biases are and how listening to negative stereotypes, how they can impact students of color in subtle ways, especially within the classroom. If you're not around students of color, maybe they don't live in your community, not making the time to get to know them, they can cause teachers to do subtle things that may be discriminatory towards students of color, such as sitting all the Black students in the back of the class, or perhaps making stereotypical suggestions for students as far as career goals, things like that. So you have to definitely be aware of your unconscious biases.
All right. Third word, racial trauma.
Oh, that's a big one. Mm. I'll narrow it down. Racial trauma is huge, especially with the most recent televised um, killings of men, women, and children of color. Unfortunately, social media has made it very difficult for children to block all of that out, and it causes trauma because social media and the television allows that trauma to come into children's homes, and it's very difficult for them to avoid it. They also are living with families that have experienced racial trauma that impacts children. So when children are coming to school with this racial trauma in their community, they are being taught by teachers through no fault of their own that typically have no mental health training or background. They're held to stressful standards where they have curriculum goals that they have to be met. They don't have the time or skill set to address these needs. They typically are in a school with one school counselor, typically no social worker, definitely a lack of mental health support. So this racial trauma tends to be not addressed. And unfortunately, members of the Black community do tend to be less likely to access mental health services for a variety of reasons. So racial trauma is a huge issue that definitely needs to be recognized. And schools definitely need to be trauma informed schools, which means their staff need to be made aware of what a student who is suffering from trauma, what type of behaviors they may present, so that teachers are more, better equipped to deal with those types of behaviors.
Yes. Oh my God. I mean, you are tapping on my heart right now. All
Are
right.
you single?
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Tease it.
Oh no. Okay.
Oh, good ones are always gone.
Oh my God. This is so good. Fourth word,
Okay.
cultural competence for educators.
That's a big one too. That's a big one. We talked earlier, there's nothing that says that white teachers and white females cannot teach Black children. I am not saying that. What I'm saying is that culturally, our children are different. So instead of holding on to the hopes that we're going to miraculously attract Black teachers, Asian teachers, Latinx teachers, that's probably not going to happen for a variety of reasons. So we need to intensively stop ignoring the reality that these teachers need some intensive support and help being trained in cultural competence. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not just one and done. It's not the train the trainer method where your district sends a group of typically unwilling staff members to a training and tricks them and tells them, now that we've sent you, you come back and train your staff, because we all have attended a 1 day training or even a week-long training. But that does not mean that you have the skills now that you can go back and teach your staff a sensitive topic such as dealing with race. So if districts are truly serious about ending the racial achievement gap, which there's an obvious reason why we have not been able to get rid of it. There's no data that supports that children of color are any less intelligent. Biologically, we're no different than white children or children of any other race. So obviously there's something else missing. We are being taught by teachers who typically, no fault of their own, lack cultural competence. So districts need to stop, just talking the talk and actually walk it and make a serious commitment to developing cultural competence in their staff.
Wow.
Definitely.
So that puts me on my soapbox. I'm going to take 10 seconds to say this. If we're going to do this right, it's all about
Right.
leadership. It has to be monitored and it has to be supported and prioritized at the school and the district level by leaders. If not, you're sending a message. You may not value your Black and brown students as much as you say you do. It's in actions. Now, I'm going to go back to something you said, because this is also important when we talk about cultural competence. It's not just Black and white. I think people get lost in that. And we spoke earlier about race, gender, sex, class. All those things create cultures of students.
Right.
And those are things that we have to be competent about in order to teach all of our children to address what we say, this whole child, right?
Right.
And so for everybody that's listening and viewing, it's not just about race. There are several cultures of students that we have to embrace in order for our students to feel valued and really access their independence and individuality as a person and a learner. They go hand in hand. All right. So let's go. Let's go a little bit further, because I think I could talk to you all day.
But I agree with you 100%, because that's definitely one thing that I've tried to expand my research, and when I'm doing trainings, to not just focus on Black students, but because there's more than just Black students. So I try to include, BIPOC, Indigenous students, people of color. There's just all sorts of races, and it's not, and then I try to focus not just on racial microaggressions, but microaggressions in general. And it's funny because when I do the trainings, people are like, oh my God, I'm just going to offend everybody. Why don't I just be quiet and say nothing? So my point is, just stop and think before you speak.
Mhm.
That's the bottom line. Think before you speak. Is what I'm saying necessary? Did I think about it? Do I need to taper it? Just think first and put yourself in someone else's shoes before you spout off. And if you make a mistake, genuinely apologize and genuinely do the work to do better. We all say things that, that we're wrong for, that may not be appropriate. Don't get caught up in saying the wrong thing. Just, do right by children, do right by people.
And I brought that up because one of the issues I see or I hear in conversation a lot is when you see Black teachers
Mhm.
mistreating Black students. And
Absolutely.
for some people, they're shocked, like, well, why would a Black teacher mistreat a Black student? Well, I don't think that teacher all the time sees themselves in that student.
Right.
We, we have middle class Black mindset, right? And so I'm interacting with an impoverished Black child. I really can't connect with that child because in my mind, we don't have much in common. So I'm talking down to them because they're poor and I'm middle class, or I have more financial support or stability. And that's an issue, right?
It is an issue, and it's an assumption. And because people make assumptions all the time, especially about me. Sorry that I'm being, emphatic, but they make the assumption because I share the same skin color as my students, that I share the same upbringing and background. And it's funny because people tell me all the time that I talk white, and I was raised in a predominantly white neighborhood. So they make the assumption that I grew up poor or in the same neighborhood than some of our students do. And I have to check myself because sometimes my thought process is coming from a different cultural background. And I may be treating these students or thinking of them in a deficit mindset or in a negative mindset. And I have to check myself. And I also tell people, if you're concerned that you are committing a racial microaggression or, a stereotype, would you have said the same thing that you said to that child of color to a white child?
Right.
That's how you can check yourself, or to someone of a different gender. So that's how you can, was that appropriate or was that not appropriate?
And we won't even get into this right now because
Okay.
we're going to talk again, but we have to. But we have to talk about cultural biases and also in curriculum and how students aren't seeing themselves and what they're learning. And it creates, as you say, it can create a whole nother level of trauma
Yes.
for students. And so we're not going to talk about it. I'm throwing it out there. I'm throwing the hook out to you. I'm going to reel you back in another day.
You don't want to talk about teachers still teaching about Harriet Tubman for Black History
Wait a
Month.
minute. You just made me roll my eyes.
You don't want to talk about that?
I don't want, not today. Not today.
Okay. All right. We'll save it for another time.
All right. So let's pivot a little bit.
Okay.
So in this field, I mean, you're doing amazing work. So let's say there's a teacher out there, or there's somebody who's in college and trying to figure out, I want to go into counseling, and they're looking at your work. What advice would you give to somebody who wants to pursue a career like the one that you have right now that's about to explode and expand in the next 5 to 10 years?
Go for it. Definitely. I always encourage people to pursue school counseling. Now, obviously, I'm not in it just for the money, but compared to counselors in the mental health field, our salary is much higher, and the turnover rate is typically a lot lower. The work is very satisfying. You get to see growth in students at a more intimate level. You get to see it probably faster than you would see it as a classroom teacher because you're not caught up with all of the rushing through the curriculum, rushing through the day, and you don't typically have the behaviors that you would see in the classroom. So although teachers tend to send students who misbehave to the school counselor. When the child comes down to you, they see you as the good guy because they typically want out of the classroom. So the child who's giving the teacher a hard time is seeing you as someone who can help them. So you get to know them in a different fashion. So it's definitely rewarding work. Um, you get to go to the bathroom whenever you want to, which makes it nice. And it's just much more relaxing. You get to work one-on-one with the parents. You're kind of like the good guy. You're in the middle. You're not the bad guy, and you always have to make sure that you distinguish with your administrator. You don't want to get caught up in the role of being the disciplinarian, which definitely can happen if you're in a building where you don't have a principal and a vice principal who typically deals with discipline.
Right.
So that can be an uncomfortable conversation to have with your administrator, because if the student sees you as the disciplinarian, they are not going to come and spill their guts out to you when they know you're going to suspend them the next day, possibly.
Yeah.
So you want to distinguish your role as respectfully as possible with leadership. So it for me to stick with this job for 25 years, it must be pretty rewarding. So
Awesome.
I've mentored many college students by providing them with internship space at my building. So it's definitely something that I highly, after 25 years, I'm still excited and enthusiastic about it. So I highly recommend it.
Right. And you're still smiling, and you have not once yet talked about retirement.
Well, I haven't, but typically you can just kind of tell when somebody has sour grapes about their job.
Yes.
Even after COVID, I'm still smiling about it.
Yes.
And the kids know, they just know. But it has its negative points, the paperwork and the meetings but overall, I love seeing the kids in the morning. I just love the hugs. It's fun.
Yeah.
I enjoy it.
It gives life. That's what I tell
It
people.
does. It does. I'm about to be 100 at the end of the month. You wouldn't even know it. I'm just teasing.
Good melanin. That's what it is. Good melanin.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So tell us two things. I want
Mhm.
you to share with us your biggest accomplishment
Okay.
and your biggest challenge. So I want you to share the challenge first, because I want to end on a positive with the accomplishment.
Biggest challenge. Let me think. So my biggest challenge probably has been a term called imposter syndrome. I see you taking a breath. So imposter syndrome took me about until yesterday to get over. And for our viewers that don't know what it means, I can't think of I think it's a woman who coined the term, but it basically is insecurity and doubt about your ability. Typically, people that are high achieving, they're just doubtful that they are as good as they are. And you just doubt that you are qualified. So it tends to cripple you and make you insecure about applying for jobs, asking for how much you're worth, and you're just self-doubt. So I have experienced that. Um, Even with entering the whole doctoral program, my principal entered the program and has been successful with it. And she saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. I always admired her. She was very well versed in equity work, and she used to talk about critical race theory and all these other theories, and I had no interest. It's not like I grew up wanting to know about this. My eyes would glaze over. Cute little white woman who I respected. And I'm thinking, how does she know all this? My eyes are just glazing over, like, here we go with this talk. But then I was like, okay, she knows a little something. So I started doing some side reading. And then she suggested I apply to the doctoral program, which I did and got accepted. But then the insecurity. So after I graduated, I knew I wanted to do more with it. And so happy that I chose a topic that I could expand and make money off of. And I was passionate and obsessed about it. Like racial microaggressions are life. So like you have to find something that you eat, sleep, and dream about. Most people pick a dissertation topic and they're just done.
Right.
Like this is life. I'm known as the racial microaggression queen. So, but with this whole imposter syndrome, I was insecure about doing these trainings, about being known as an expert, about asking to be paid, about
Wow.
deciding what fee to charge. And it just, am I going to know how to answer the questions? Am I going to ever know all this information so that I can define it? Because you can know stuff in your head, but if you can't teach it to someone and if you can't explain it in layman's terms and break it down, then you're not an effective teacher.
Yeah.
We've all had teachers like that. They can be as smart as can be, but if they can't teach it to you, then they're ineffective. So it really just did not get to be until recently where I got confident enough and I said, yeah, I've done the research, I've done the work. I am the expert, not in an arrogant way, but in a confident way. I deserve to be paid my worth. I read an article that women tend to statistically not apply for jobs that they don't meet. I don't know if it was 100% but it was a very high percentage of all of the criteria that the employer is looking for. And they tend to miss out on opportunities. Men, on the other hand, will apply for jobs that they don't meet all of the criteria, and they tend to get the job over women. But we don't do that. And I started to apply for jobs that I don't, meet the criteria. Now, not something crazy. Google had a job where the salary was $206,000. Like I met none of the criteria except for a PhD. Now I didn't apply for that. But what I'm saying is just having confidence in your
Yeah,
ability and saying, even if you don't get the job, you get nothing if you don't try.
that's right.
So
Great.
that's been hard. Like it's just a little voice in your head saying, nah, they're not going to pick you. No, they're not if you don't try.
There you go. You're absolutely right. All right. Biggest accomplishment.
My biggest accomplishment is non-academic, believe it or not.
Okay.
I have 3 children and I have 2 lovely girls that are 14, Melanie and Maria. And I have a wonderful son who's 18 and he just graduated from Pittsburgh Public Schools. He is an honor student, honor graduate. And my daughters are honor students also with the Pittsburgh Public School system. And I am someone who did not anticipate having children. And I am just proud that as a single parent who co-parents with my ex-husband, that I was able to navigate the whole single parent thing, working multiple jobs at times, going to school, and just maintaining a full-time job, also a household, and that my children are relatively sane, well behaved, healthy, and academically that they do well. So all of this other, all of the other things I've accomplished are wonderful, but to have good children, respectful children that are stable, to me, that's the biggest accomplishment,
Wow.
especially in this world. They could have went any direction. So I'm thankful for all of the support from both of our families and my friends. So that's the biggest accomplishment.
Oh, wow. Kudos to you. I haven't met your kids, but I bet they're wonderful.
They are. They really are.
So here's my very last question, and then our time will come to an end.
Okay.
If you don't mind, talk to us a little bit about how your affiliation with the Black Doctoral Network has enhanced your career.
Well, I'm looking forward to finding out. So I am a relatively new member.
Oh, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I've been a member maybe about 3 weeks, but you have a member, Dr. Cecilia Williams. She suggested that I apply for your conference, which is in October, to be a presenter. And I did apply and my abstract was selected. I will be presenting racial microaggressions, and white teachers' denial of the perpetration of racial microaggressions towards Black teachers. So it's basically a presentation of my dissertation, and it's going to, reveal how, although white teachers acknowledge that Black teachers do experience racial microaggressions, somehow they didn't acknowledge that they were the perpetrators. So that should be interesting. So, being a part of this networking organization has allowed me to do that. And I've had the pleasure of being invited to this very first podcast and meeting you. And I'm just looking forward to networking with other professionals because although I have great family and friends, they are very tired of racial microaggressions. Yeah, they don't want to sit through any more practice Zoom meetings, take any more polls or surveys. Yeah, they want the old Nena back. They're tired of Dr. Hisle.
They want you to spread the love somewhere else.
Yeah, they want me reading magazines and knitting again, not doing research.
Well, listen, tell them that old Nena, she's there, but there is this new expanded woke level of Nena that we
Right.
are so excited to have here at the
Thank
Black
you.
Doctoral Network. Thank you so much for joining me. This has been a wonderful time shared of information and hopefully a lot of enlightenment for those that are listening and viewing and reflection for even me, myself. So
Hey,
thank you for agreeing to do this. It has been a pleasure, Dr. Hassel. Would you please tell our viewers and listeners where they can go and learn more about you and the work you're doing?
absolutely. I would love to have you visit www.I on equity, that's EYE on equity, EQUITY consulting, consulting.com. And my email address is Nena, Nena, Hisle, Hisle at yahoo.com. Thank you.
Well, thank you again for joining me. I have really enjoyed this time. Thank you guys for connecting with us. Please be sure to stay tuned to other podcasts and connect with the Black Doctor Network on all of our social media channels. Thank you for joining us today for the Black Doctors Talk podcast. We hope you will join us again next time. But for now, be sure to like, share, subscribe, and don't forget to tell a friend. Thank you guys, and thank you, Dr. Heisel.